Hi, this is Dr. Claire, and today we're going to be talking about how respiratory gases like oxygen are transported around the body. Most animals are too large to rely on diffusion alone to get oxygen to all the different parts of their body that need it, and so they have to have some other way to get it around, and that generally is transported in the blood. So blood is a specific type of connective tissue that has a fluid matrix called plasma, and then various what are called formed elements or cells. They can be cell-like structures. Technically, platelets are not a cell because they don't have a nucleus, but they are cell-like. The main functions of the blood has several functions. The big function of the blood is transportation of gases and nutrients throughout the body to get it to all the different parts of the body so that you can keep your cells alive. But it also plays a role in regulation. That's how the hormones get to different parts of the body, as we learned in our hormone lecture. And it also serves a big immune function. There are many components of the blood that serve to protect the body from invaders. So if you're looking at the blood, in humans and many vertebrates, about half of it is going to be plasma, so half of it is going to be liquid. That liquid is going to contain a number of proteins and dissolved gases and electrolytes and various other things. It's mostly water. And then the other, if you spin it down, about the other half is going to be cells of some type. Most of that, 90% of that, is going to, or 99% of that, I think, is going to be red blood cells. And red blood cells are the specific cells that are used to transport respiratory gases. So that's what we're going to be talking about in more detail. There's also the white blood cells that are involved in the immune system and the platelets that are involved in blood clotting. But the major component of those cells are going to be these red blood cells. Okay? So these respiratory gases need to be transported, and they're transported in the blood by binding to hemoglobin, and hemoglobin is contained within these red blood cells. Now, the reason that it binds to that you have to have hemoglobin is because, as you hopefully remember from the respiratory lecture, oxygen actually doesn't dissolve terribly well in water, and so you can't just have oxygen dissolve into the water of your blood and transport it around. You need to be able to transport more oxygen than that. So oxygen will bind to the hemoglobin temporarily, and then it can be released in other parts of the body. So hemoglobin will pick up oxygen where the partial pressure of oxygen is high. So where there's a lot of oxygen, hemoglobin will pick it up, and then it'll release oxygen where the partial pressure is low. So here's what hemoglobin looks like. It is a protein. It has 4 polypeptide subunits. Each subunit has a heme group, which is a compound that contains an iron molecule, and each heme group can bind 1 molecule of oxygen. Okay, so a hemoglobin molecule can bind a total of 4 molecules of oxygen. Now, as I said, the affinity for hemoglobin to these oxygen molecules has to do with the partial pressure of oxygen in the environment. So where there's a lot of oxygen, hemoglobin has a very strong affinity for oxygen molecules. So it'll pull them out and bind them. Okay, so that's really good because then when your blood is in your lungs, and there's a lot of oxygen there, that hemoglobin is going to grab up a whole bunch of that oxygen. Then when the blood vessels move you to a part of the body where there's less oxygen, the hemoglobin is going to bind less tightly to oxygen. So it's going to start letting oxygen go. And that works really well because if it goes to like your muscles while you're running, there's not very much oxygen there, and the blood will release the oxygen from the hemoglobin and into those tissues that need the oxygen. All right. In addition to this trend that you see, there's actually another compound in the muscles called myoglobin, which also binds to oxygen, and that's a way that your muscles can store oxygen for when they need it. So you don't necessarily know that you're going to have to run in just a second. So your muscles need to have a supply of oxygen present at all times, and so the myoglobin will allow for that oxygen supply to be already in the muscle. And myoglobin actually binds even more tightly to oxygen than hemoglobin does. So when the blood vessels are passing through the muscles, that myoglobin is going to have a really strong affinity for that oxygen. It's going to grab it off the hemoglobin and basically hold on to it. And myoglobin will only let go of that oxygen when the partial pressure gets very low. So when there's very little oxygen. So that means that it's stored in there in your muscle until your body needs it. And then when the partial pressure gets very low in your muscles, then it'll release that oxygen and allow your muscles to keep functioning. Okay, that kind of makes sense? All right. Other things do affect how tightly hemoglobin binds to oxygen as well. So hemoglobin will bind less tightly to oxygen when the temperature is warmer than it will when the temperature is cooler. So that's this graph here on the right. So if you think about your muscles are working, right? What happens to the temperature of your muscles when you are exercising strenuously? They get hot, right? And so if your muscles are hot, that means that they're working hard. That means that they need more oxygen. So the hemoglobin actually will release more oxygen when the muscles are warm. So that helps keep up with the oxygen demand. Also, when the pH of the muscles goes down, that it'll also release oxygen more easily. And that's because when if you think about it, when your muscles are working hard, they're using oxygen, they're producing carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is weakly acidic. So if your muscles are slightly acidic, they have a lower pH, then they probably need more oxygen because they're probably working hard. So again, the hemoglobin releases more oxygen in that scenario than when the pH is higher. Okay? So all of these things help the hemoglobin in the blood cells to deliver oxygen to the different parts of the body that need it at that particular point in time. All right, the other respiratory gas that we have to consider is carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide is produced as waste when we are breaking down these sugar molecules to make energy. And we need to get that out of our system. So carbon dioxide, it dissolves a little bit better in water than oxygen does. But we still need to get it into another form so that we can just get more of it into the bloodstream to get rid of it. And so what happens is that in the blood plasma, carbon dioxide gets turned into bicarbonate gradually over time. It's a weak acid. But within the red blood cells, if carbon dioxide diffuses in there, there's actually an enzyme called carbonic anhydrase, which will quickly convert that carbon dioxide to bicarbonate. So what that does, when it gets converted to bicarbonate, that lowers the carbon dioxide concentration and increases the amount of diffusion out of the tissues and into the bloodstream. So it increases that concentration gradient and allows more carbon dioxide to diffuse. Then, up in the lungs, we have the reverse reaction where carbonic anhydrase is going to turn the bicarbonate ion back into carbon dioxide and allow it to diffuse out of the bloodstream and into the lungs so that you can breathe it out. So breathing or ventilation, actually breathing in and out, is actually regulated by a part of the medulla oblongata, the brain stem of your brain, called the pons. And the pons sends the involuntary signals that cause you to breathe in and out without thinking about it, because you do breathe even if you're not consciously thinking about breathing, you will continue to breathe. So that signal actually comes from the pons. The pons will send signals on a regular basis to the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles between the ribs to cause you to inhale, and then it'll stop sending a signal. So that gives you that regular pattern. If you have a break in the spinal cord between the pons and the medulla, you will still breathe, but it won't be regular. It'll be kind of more sporadic because the pons is really what's giving it that regular system. If you have a break below the medulla, then there's no signal from your brainstem getting to the rest of your body. And so you will not breathe at all, and you'll need to be put on a breathing machine. You can voluntarily override the pons by thinking about breathing. If you wanted to hold your breath and throw a temper tantrum, right, you can do that. But eventually when you pass out, then you'll go back to the involuntary state and you'll start to breathe regularly again. Okay? Now, the feeling like you need to breathe, if you ever have held your breath for an extended period of time, you know that you start to get this feeling like, oh my gosh, I really have to breathe. And that feeling is actually interesting. It's actually triggered more by a buildup in carbon dioxide than it is by a decrease in oxygen. So if you look at these graphs here, The red is your carbon dioxide levels going down. Or, sorry. If you look at this graph here, we have a red line and a blue line. The blue line is your carbon dioxide levels going up and the effect on your breathing rate, your ventilation rate. And the red line is what happens when your oxygen levels go down. So if you look at this, you can see that you react much more strongly on the blue line to an increase in carbon dioxide than you do from a decrease in oxygen. Free divers, people who dive without breathing equipment to very deep depths, will often hyperventilate prior to diving. And the reason they do that is because hyperventilating gets a lot of carbon dioxide out of your system. By breathing in and out very rapidly, you are able to purge your system of carbon dioxide. Then you can dive and you won't feel the urge to breathe right away. While you're hyperventilating, you're also bringing your oxygen levels up as high as possible. And that's good because you are not going to breathe and you're going to go dive, right? The problem is that a lot of times they get their carbon dioxide levels so far down that even though they are running out of oxygen when they're diving, they don't feel that really strong urge to breathe because the carbon dioxide levels haven't built up enough. And this is why free diving is a very dangerous sport, because you can actually run out of oxygen and pass out underwater, and there's a lot of fatalities because of that. One more animal diving champion is the elephant seal. The elephant seal can hold its breath. It's a mammal, so it needs a lot of oxygen, but it can hold its breath for over 2 hours. And what allows them to do that is that they have a very large blood volume. So they actually have specialized blood vessels in their abdomen that will store blood. And so the really large blood volume means they have a lot of hemoglobin in their blood, their big volume of blood, to store a lot of oxygen for these deep dives. And they also have way more myoglobin in their muscles than we do. And both of these things allow them to store a lot of oxygen while they're up at the surface breathing, and then be able to use that oxygen while they're diving. All right, that's my lecture on respiratory gas transport. See you next time.